Good morning. Welcome. It is so nice to see you all again, joining us for this panel that is a luxury. It is such a pleasure to be here with you. As Alberto Croce was saying earlier, in this effort to learn by doing, we will have four speakers on this session who have been working on learning by doing through service learning. We talked about the need to educate in solidarity, for caring, and we have here four speakers who have been working in this area for many years. Oftentimes we have read their publications, we have listened to them in conferences. Now many of us are at home, and we have been at home for a long time. So now we are going to sit at the same table as friends, and we are going to have an exchange of ideas, opinions, and this fills us with high expectations. We will have Andrew Furco, Roser Batle, Carol Ma, and Nieves Tapia participate in this session. I'm going to introduce the four speakers. Then we are going to briefly listen to each of them. They are going to tell us about their first steps in service learning, their backgrounds, and then we are going to have a discussion. Andrew Furco is an Associate Vice President for Public Engagement at the University of Minnesota. He's also a professor of higher education. His scholarly work focuses on examining the role of service learning and community engagement in primary, secondary, and higher education systems in the U.S. and abroad. I think that all of us know Andy. He has participated many times in our international conferences. He has numerous publications. You can read his complete CV in our page. He has been awarded different prizes, and we are so happy to have him with us today. Roser Batle is a pedagogist, a hiker, and runner. She is the founder of the Service Learning Spanish Network. She has worked in public administration at the university and in the associative movement. She's part of the Service Learning Promotion Center in Catalonia. She's part of the Sorbicas Foundation in Basque Country, and she has published several publications, including a book on service learning. Carol Ma is known as an active promoter and passionate about service learning. She has worked to promote and implement service learning for more than 15 years. She is the founding member of Service Learning in Lynn University with more than 100 projects. She is a researcher, a pioneer in service learning, and she has also done studies outside her country. She's also the director of the Master's and PhD program on gerontology. She is the director of the postgraduate certificate on service learning, and she's also a senior fellow of service learning and community engagement at the Singapur Social Sciences University. Finally, we have Nieves Tapia, who started and coordinated the service learning programs for the Ministry of Education in Argentina. She has offered hundreds of lectures, and she is also the author of many publications. She has been honored with different awards and prizes, and she is member of the International Association of Service Learning and Community Service. I think we are ready now. I would like to start, as I said, listening to each of you. Andy will go first. Tell us how you got involved with service learning. What sparked your interest in the first place? Where you come from? You come from the academic background, from another movement. Why is it important for you? Andy, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Luz, for that wonderful introduction, and congratulations, Nieves, on another wonderful year of a conference. And I'm sorry we can't all be together, but I'm glad we have this forum to be able to connect virtually. I just want to say, I started as as an educator in primary and secondary schools. I was a music teacher working with middle school and high school. And then I became an administrator. And it was during my time as a vice principal for a middle school where I serendipitously ran into service learning. And I didn't know what it was. This was the early 1990s, where service learning in the US was not well known. It wasn't really something that people were talking about. And I worked for a principal, a school director who every day had a new idea, and he'd come in every day and say, Andy, I have this new idea. And I would think, oh no, because I knew I'd be responsible for it. And then one day he comes in, he says, I have this great idea. I think all our students should do community service. And I thought, oh my goodness, all these students out in the neighborhood terrorizing all the people in the neighborhood, the parents calling my office saying, what's my son or daughter doing? But it changed my life. I saw amazing transformations in our students that I knew we could not capture in the classroom. The students who were in my office for discipline, who would be sent to my office for discipline issues in the classroom, were the ones who are now staying after school to work on their projects. They would come to me and say, Mr. Furco, look what I did. I did this. And there was a sense of empowerment in the students, and I knew there was something there that we could not capture in the classroom. So I became very interested in learning more about community service, and then got connected with the National Youth Leadership Council, NYLC, and Dr. Jim Kielsmeyer, who is our saint here for service learning in the US. And he introduced me to service learning, and I got to learn more about experiential learning and how important that was in the schools. Anyway, long story short is then I pursued my doctorate and wanted to learn more about service learning. I studied at Berkeley. And at the time when I was working on my dissertation on service learning, we had this big federal program in the US. And Berkeley was one of the recipients of this grant for service learning. And I was asked to lead this new center, and became a research center, and we worked with the people, the faculty and the departments at Berkeley. And little by little, I started becoming a service learning advocate, and been working with service learning ever since. And now as an administrator for university, it's been very, very important for me to ensure that our students have these experiences, that our faculty learn how to do high quality service learning. So I come from it from an educator's perspective, and it's been a wonderful journey over the years to understand the complexity of this work. You know, it's not just going out and doing work in communities. There's so much that goes with it. And I've learned so much from everyone in Nieves and all the people at CLAYSS, and of course from Carol in Asia and Chado, my wonderful colleague Chado, who I met many, many years ago. So, you know, this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to be together to make a difference, a positive difference for the world. And I think it all is in the hands of our young people who I think have the new ideas, the innovations, the things that we adults sometimes don't even think about. So that's been my journey, and one that is every day I get inspired by what service learning can do.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so much, Andy. Charo? I join Andy in his comments. I think that what you are doing, Nieves, is extraordinary. I come from the associative movement that in the 1970s, I come from the associative movement in the 1970s. This movement was against Franco. And at that time, I was working in the non-formal sector, helping those in need in poor settlements. And I realized that educators that were working in those poor neighborhoods had an awareness and a spirit of service. But at the same time, we ran the risk of not being able to convey this to the students we were working with. So we run the risk of educating, even in those humble neighborhoods. We had the opportunity to develop creative citizens, responsible citizens, citizens that would be highly sociable, but at the same time self-centered. So that was a risk for us. I was very concerned about that. And I realized that when we were working, following the guidelines of project pedagogy, that at that time that was like a Bible to us, everything could sound highly modern, stimulating, but would make us look inwards with a self-centered approach. Just thinking, oh, we are doing so great, we have such a wonderful group, we love one another, this fills us with emotion, but that was not necessarily that we had a spirit to change the world, to effect a transformation. So I was very much concerned about that until I got to know some Argentinians. You may say, how come that? But I was able to move away the clouds that were blocking the sun, and I was able to see the sun again. I remember there was an international conference at which I met Alberto Croce, an Argentinian. Alberto was like a pastor, like a shepherd that would take me to the service learning mountain. You have the mountain right in front of you. And Nieves, I met her shortly after that, and she was like my guide. She taught me what path I should take to get to the mountain, where I could camp, where I could find some rest, where I could find a river. So that connection with Argentinians opened my eyes. So I realized that educators had felt committed, but it didn't make any sense to keep that to us. We had to do whatever we can to plant the seeds in the hearts of our students of solidarity. That was my beginning with service learning. Thank you, Charo. Carol?
Everybody, yeah, I'm so happy that I get a chance to talk to you all. Yeah, I'm now in Singapore. Now it's around 11 p.m. at night. Yeah, and I'm happy that I still keep myself awake because I want to talk to you all. And it's pity that I didn't get a chance to come to Argentina, but I hope that, next time I can come and meet you all in person. Yeah, to talk about my service learning journey. And I think I may be the only one that I start to do my service learning while I was primary school students. Yeah, and I understand that in Argentina, a lot of students from their even kindergarten, they will also do service learning. But at that time when I start my service learning journey, we don't really know the term service learning. Yeah, and I actually start to do a project called Big Brother and Sister. Yeah, and at that time, I was in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is part of China. We have a lot of students also came from mainland China, and they need someone from Hong Kong to share about their life experience. And I became one of the big sister, yeah, and work with the little brother, and then to share about the Hong Kong cultures and Hong Kong history. Yeah, and since then, I actually committed to do service. Yeah, and from my secondary school and then university life, and I do a lot of services. And now is the COVID pandemic, right? And then during that time that I don't know whether you still remember SARS period. Yeah, and during the SARS period in Hong Kong, we actually have a lot of people pass away. And I was one of the leader to gather all our students at my university, Ningnan University, to do public educations in the community. And then we also do fundraising, and then to help those needy to create masks, and also got someone, to buy masks for the low-income family. Yeah, and I remember that it keep motivating me to do more, yeah, for the community. And I think my the tipping point for me was the time that in 2001 I was selected as one of the W.T. Chan Fellows to study in UCLA to learn about service learning. Yeah, and at that time I learned about service learning. Yeah, and then but as I mentioned, we don't really call service learning. We have social services, we have community services, and then actually in 2001, I'm sure that you all remember that was 9/11. And then also that triggered me a lot because it's also my first time that being away from home, yeah, and then and also experience that tragedy, yeah. And then so to me, I keep thinking about why we have this kind of tragedies, yeah, and whether we can have world peace or not, yeah. And then so I met friends who support American fight back, yeah, to Iraq. And then so I also have friends that we want to have a peaceful society. And then I keep asking myself, yeah, why we need to have that happen again? Yeah, and then so after my fellowship in UCLA, I got a chance to went back to Hong Kong, and then I represent Hong Kong to go to Korea to attend a conference called Model UN. Yeah, and the conference theme is about world peace. Yeah, and I think all my life journey, all related to the different issue. Yeah, and then so I met people from around the world. They are all young people. Yeah, I'm actually not that young now, but I see myself still very young because I engage in doing service learning. Yeah, and then so I met people around the world, and then they all want to have world peace. Then I asked myself what we can do more. So I start to engage myself to do service learning and understand more about the service learning. We attend the first international service learning conference in Asia that was in Thailand. And I was also one of the student leaders to attend the conference there. And then as the student leaders, yeah, and then I set up the first office of service learning in Hong Kong. Yeah, and then afterward, then we have more university. They also set up service learning. From Hong Kong, I actually also helped to revitalize the Service Learning Asian Network. Yeah, and then now we have more than 50 universities, yeah, in Asia that we work together to develop courses related to service learning. We also organize different, service learning conference. Yeah, and so this also made me continue to think about what we can do more, because every time when I meet with partners like Andy, Nieves, and then also even the pioneer in service learning like Timothy, Drake-Drow. And I find that, they have a lot of values, yeah, and also a lot of things that I can learn as a young person from them. Yeah, and I see this is an intergenerational, learning for me. Yeah, and I also, because of service learning, made me to keep thinking about my lifelong learning, because I tell myself service learning is a lifelong learning philosophy. Yeah, it's not just about service and learning. It's somehow that how you can start doing this service learning from yourself to your family, and then also, to the community, and then at the end to the country. Yeah, and I'm now in Singapore. Yeah, I'm working in the Singapore University of Social Sciences. And I think, from Hong Kong to Singapore, it made me also see more. So I've been engaging a lot of services. And I think this also make me, try to engage people wherever you are, and, whoever people that you meet. Yeah, because this is actually the magic of the service learning that connect us, like what we are now doing. Yeah, we have people from the United States and then Argentina. And I know that Travel is in another mountain area, right? Yeah, and then so Singapore, we actually connect, yeah, because of service learning. So thank you very much, and hope to share with you all more about my experience later on. Yeah.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Carol. Nieves, you go next. Well, I didn't start when I was at elementary school like Carol did, but I think that my first contact with service learning, it wasn't called like that at that time, but it was when I was 13, and I started participating in a youth movement of the Catholic Church. And along those years, when I was a teenager and a young woman, when I did many things that my parents were very nervous about, because we were in the middle of a dictatorship and I was organizing the youth meetings and demonstrations and fighting for peace with Chile, that was just the opposite with what the governments wanted. Through all that process of my youth participation and engagement, it's very clear for me that that is what made me the person I am today. I learned to do many things. I learned to manage. I learned to speak in public. I learned to plan and organize and put myself at risk because I was part of a youth organization. So as Charo, the same as Charo, I come more from the social field. The thing is that as Andy, I decided to become a teacher, and I started to work as a teacher. In my case, I was a history teacher at middle school, and also trying to help my students to have that experience that I had had as part of a youth movement, so that they could also have that experience of doing something for their community, of organizing themselves. But I had never heard of service learning before. Many years after that, in 1993, I was working as a public official at the Undersecretariat of the Youth in Argentina, and I was invited to contact some organizations in the United States. And just by chance, I had a meeting at New York University where Alice Astor and Joel Shash explained to me what was this service learning about. And it was like, as Charo said, it was like the clouds moved away and let me see the sun. All my personal history made sense at that moment. And I said, this is what happened to me, that we are at the service of the others. You learn things that you can't learn just by reading books. So speaking of service learning, it was as if they were telling me the story of my life, actually. And after that, you know, circumstances, life circumstances, my boss at the Undersecretary was fired, so I was fired as well, so I had to look for another job, and I ended up working at the Ministry of Education of Argentina precisely when a huge reform of middle school was being planned. And I was nobody at that time. I was just another consultant among a lot of consultants. But I told my boss that I had heard of a pedagogy called service learning, that I thought it could be interesting. And my boss told me, if you change the name of that, we can include it in the curriculum. So at that moment, it was included as something like research and social and community engagement process, because you're at the ministry, they love long names for things. So I feel that that was the beginning of my second learning stage, because I started being in contact with Argentinian schools that didn't know that what they were doing was called service learning, as had happened to me many years ago. They didn't know that it was called like that in US universities, but they were doing it actually. And through the experiences in the schools in Argentina, I learned most of the things I know about service learning. So basically, what we tried to do was to use that experience and disseminate it. So in 1997, we organized the first international seminar on service learning. That was a very small meeting of officials from Argentina and specialists from different parts of the world that told us what they were doing. And then as time went by, the program was in the year 2000, it became a national program. The presidential award was created for the care in schools, where the president rewards the best experiences. And in Argentina, as we have lots of crises, in 2001, we had a big change in the government. The ministry was reduced. I was out of job again. And with a group of colleagues, we decided to create the Latin American Center for Service Learning, CLAYSS. That was in 2002. And although after that I returned to the ministry the next year, when the national program of caring education was created again, that still continues, CLAYSS started to grow, and for 10 years now I've been working exclusively for CLAYSS to promote this way of educating that, as Andy and Carol and Charo have said, we all agree that it's one way of educating that implies not only repeating formulas and learning contents, but also learning to be better people and using the knowledge to the service of our societies. Thank you. It's very interesting how all of you, one way or other, spoke of transformation. Transformation of yourselves. Carol started when she was very young, or the professional transformation in terms of something that you had been doing in a way, and you decided, you use that metaphor of that blast, that explosion and seeing the sun, and transmission as well. So in that sense, I'm interested in hearing from you why you think that service learning is relevant right now in this time of the pandemic, the lockdown, and being in our homes in different ways. But not only now. Why was it important before the pandemic? Why it is important now? And what do you foresee, or what do you think can be important for the future as well? I would like Charo to go first, and then the others may take the floor. Okay, let's see. I think that before the pandemic, service learning was necessary. It was necessary to promote it in order to recover the social meaning of education, an education whose main purpose should be improving societies. We cannot educate and train citizens that are only paying attention to their own professional careers and their curriculum. That doesn't help us. It doesn't save us as civilizations. So in general, I think that this justification is even more brilliant and wonderful than ever in the pandemic, because the pandemic has evidenced how fragile we are, how unstable our certainties are, how difficult it's going to be to maintain a world based on oppression, inequality, the exploitation of the natural environment and the social environment, and in a way, how in this context it's necessary for our children, our youth, to be educated in generosity. Without generosity, life will perish, as Leonardo Boff once said. We cannot afford not to educate in generosity, because it's a right. Children have a right to have the tools that will allow them to make their civilization, society, their world sustainable. If we deprive them with that possibility of being generous, we are depriving them of the possibility of sustaining this planet, this world, this civilization. Therefore, I think that now, more than ever, service learning is like a compass that illuminates the path to follow. And it is not just a methodology. It's also, and mainly, a philosophy of understanding education as a tool to change the world. I continue with what Chara was saying. I fully agree. I think that if we look at this from our own concerns, the concerns of educators in formal education, we should also say that service learning is a great business because it allows us to have this education that transforms reality, but at the same time, it allows us to educate much more effectively, motivate our students because they are always wondering why is it good to go to school or a university. That complain that university is just theory and it has nothing to do with real life. This allows us to generate opportunities for vocational training that is relevant and significant, and therefore it allows us to transform the world, but it also allows us to offer better quality of education. And I would finish by thinking of continents like Latin America, where we have lots of children and adolescents and youth in poverty. It also allows us to generate an education that is inclusive, that gives them the dignity of being able to be generous. Because very often we speak of rights, the rights to receive things. But very often in the educational system, we tend to look at the vulnerable ones only as beneficiaries. But service learning gives them the dignity that it doesn't matter how poor you are, it doesn't matter if you are handicapped, it doesn't matter how small you are. From kindergarten, they are capable of doing things to improve their communities. So in that sense, I think that service learning has made sense in the past. It makes sense now, and it will continue making sense. But I would emphasize what Chara mentioned. I think that the pandemic has made it very evident how fictitious is that you can make individual decisions that don't affect the whole, the others. Because right now, if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not taking care of the others. And we've seen in these months extraordinary examples of generosity and heroism in donating to others. And we've also seen examples of huge lack of responsibility and lack of personal and care, individual care and group care. So there's no option here. We cannot educate for irresponsibility. Educators cannot educate for a blind individualism. Now more than ever, we need to educate for taking care of one another and to know how to do it, because sometimes that's not that easy. Good intentions, I think there's a saying that says that the road to hell is full of good intentions, but that's not enough. We have to learn how to do it.
To echo what Nieves and Charo have said, and I think for those of us who live in the northern parts of the globe, one of the things prior to the pandemic that we have continued to see is this bubbling up of these systemic inequities in our society, oftentimes manifested by corporatization, capitalization of everything. Everything's becoming very transactional, and there's a very individualistic approach to increasingly to our society. And I think prior to the pandemic, I think through service learning and through other pedagogies and practices that engage young people, we're seeing the millennials and the generation X and Z and whatever, all the other letters that go along with the generations, really wanting to contribute and make a difference, to be more involved, to take action. And I think the pandemic, not only the pandemic, I can tell you from just my experience being at the University of Minnesota in the middle of a lot of strife that happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd's murder and how that resonated globally, that I think that was just a symptom of anger and strife around these inequities that had bubbled up. and who was at the forefront of leading that change with the young people. And I think that the reason service learning is so important, because one of the elements of service learning is the notion of empowerment. It is about agency of young people to make a difference, that young people do have a voice. Even though they may not have a vote, they do have a voice, and they can make a difference if they band together, if they have a goal, and if they take action in positive ways. And I think with the pandemic now, where we are so isolated, I think it even makes the inequities even more stark, because the pandemic doesn't discriminate. It attacks everyone, no matter who you are or where you live or how wealthy you are, or so it is in some ways an equalizer, and is making us realize that none of us individually have the capacity to address this issue. And the only way we're going to do is by working together through the notion of solidaridad, right? Solidaridad. It's about being together. And that's an existential issue for our societies, for us as human beings, for us as democracies and various political states, for us as just being able to live in a society that's going to be a healthy one where we could all prosper. And I think service learning is so important because it reminds us about the power of working together for the common good. And it's about that notion of not just getting involved, but taking action that's going to make a difference. And so that learning piece becomes really important in the service learning endeavor as well, is that we're learning from each other, and we're learning to work together, and we're learning to make a difference. And so I think now more than ever, service learning is so essential for us to be able to get through these very difficult times on so many different levels of our society.
Yeah, I totally agree with that also. Yeah, and actually, if you ask me, before and after the pandemic, actually we see service learning is very important. And then what I actually, also see, because we are all adapting the new normal. Yeah, and so that's why we are trying to also think out of the box. Other than what we what Andy mentioned about service learning actually is empowerment, as a kind of an empowerment. But at the same time, what I also see is also possibility for us to connect, more, strengthen our relationship, and also think more about ourselves. Yeah, not only about the society. Yeah, the reason why is, I'm sure that you all know that when we talk about service learning, we have a 4C of the reflection, right? Yeah, continuous, connected, challenging, and contextualized, right? And I actually also think about during this pandemic, we also have 4C. 4C in the terms is connections. Yeah, we have more connection with our family and friends. Yeah, and because we worry about our friends who live alone, and you will give them a call, or maybe you will, do a Zoom with them. Yeah, and so that's actually make us more connected. Yeah, and then if you know someone who live alone and they don't have mask, and they don't have they don't know how to go out to buy grocery stuff, then you will help them to do online shopping. Yeah, and send grocery to them, directly. But you may not do that when before the pandemic. But this actually connect to us. And then another thing that what we also need to do because of the pandemic, we have to care about ourselves. Yeah, start from ourselves. Why I keep saying about that is, if you don't have a healthy body, how can you take care of others, right? So that's why starting to care about yourself is very important. That's what I found out in, to certain time of the, my life. I just focus on work and work and work. Yeah, and I think that, I have more health conscious. Yeah, so that's the reason why I share with my friends. I walk at least 10,000 steps. Starting from June till now, I have already walked 1,000 km, because I tell myself I have to eat well, sleep well, engage in leisure activities, because I live alone in Singapore. I need to go back to Hong Kong to meet my parents, to meet my friends. So you have to start to care about yourself. And from yourself, then, we'll also think about to care about other. Yeah, so I just mentioned about, our neighbors and our friends. Yeah, and then we also need to, make sure that other people, they are mentally okay. This is also a kind of service learning. It's, we always talk about academic service learning, but I see during the pandemic is not just academic service learning, but somehow we start service learning from yourself, from your family. Yeah, and then and another 2C, a community. Yeah, we have more opportunity to work with our community. Yeah, and it's not about just the employment. I mean empowerment. It's somehow that how we work with them innovatively because of the pandemic. Yeah, and because we all stay at home. We always said that, oh, elderly, a vulnerable group, you have to stay at home, don't go out. Yeah, but as an elderly, they want to go out, and they really hope that people can come and visit them. Yeah, and then so as a community, how we can show our care. For example, I work with one of the social enterprise in Singapore, and it is called SG Assist. They have an apps. Yeah, and then so if elderly could live alone, they can go to the apps and then to write down their requests. Yeah, what they want. Yeah, and then so we have volunteer nearby, and then we'll help them to address the needs. Yeah, and then it seems to me that, when we look at service learning in the past, maybe just face to face, yeah, and then of course we all want human touch, but because of the pandemic, we may change the style of engaging with our community. Yeah, and then so this community is very important. Yeah, we always need to have, community in our hearts and how we work with them. And then another C that what I also see is collaborations. Yeah, and remember that I share with you, I don't want to see people, have hatreds all the time. Yeah, honestly, some of the issue nowadays quite bothering me, like US-China relationship. Yeah, and racism. Yeah, and I keep thinking about social justice, inequality. This all really bother me a lot. The reason that we have this is because we don't have trust. Yeah, we don't believe in our relationship. Yeah, and I hope that we can take this opportunity to rebuild our trust. Yeah, and then to work together, because it's time for us to think about unity. Yeah, and I hope that during this pandemic time, yeah, and like what we are now doing again, yeah, and then to connect to each other and also share the philosophy, because Lieves mentioned about that service learning become your life story, right? Yeah, and I hope every one of us can write a service learning book related to our life. Yeah, this actually is our oral history. It's not just about ourselves, but somehow I will also see that it's also the relationship with our community, and then also our country, and also cross-border. Yeah, and so I believe if we keep talking about global citizenship, we need to learn and also understand each other's values. Yeah, and of course there are a lot of things that we can do, but what I will suggest is starting from yourself, take good care of yourself first. Yeah, from them you actually work with the community. Yeah, and I'm sure that now we have a lot of educators and students are listening to us. Yeah, and I hope that we can also think creatively. Yeah, how we can engage the service recipients, or maybe we can get them to also work with us. Yeah, and so I remember that I organized a series of seminar for the elderly who live alone, and also some caregiver. Yeah, and then I have one elderly, 92 years old, and then she actually told us through Zoom and said, this is my first time to use Zoom, to learn about how to use Zoom, because she want to do exercise with us. She want to learn about health and wellness message. Yeah, and so this kind of story always, inspire me. Yeah, because I learn from them. 92 years old, still learning. Yeah, so we are actually also, service learning don't stop us to learn. We are all learning nowadays. Yeah.
Muchas gracias, qué placer.
Thank you so much. It is so pleasant to listen to you all and to keep on reflecting together. I'm taking note of some of your ideas relating to caring, this idea that it is fictitious to believe that your individual decisions don't have an impact on your surroundings. I have been taking different notes. I'm sure you are also doing so. But I would like to listen to you as to the challenges and opportunities that you think may be there for us when we have to carry out service learning projects soon. Those that are taking place right now during the pandemic and those that will start from now onwards. Both challenges and opportunities. You have already spoken about certain opportunities, but I would like you to explore those lines. And also, along the same lines, I would like to invite you all to think whether you want to ask questions to each other. Perhaps Carol has a question for Charo, or Charo for Nieves, and Nieves for Andy, or others. So I think this is a good opportunity for you to have this exchange. So what are the opportunities and challenges that you think that we will face when carrying out service learning projects in the near future, and what questions you would ask your other colleagues in the panel? Perhaps I can take the floor first, and I can say that in CLAYSS, in March, we produced a global map that allowed us to invite all those engaged in service learning projects during the pandemic to locate themselves on that map. Thanks to the Spanish Service Learning Network, we had an explosion of Ibero-American experiences. We had projects all over the world, but mostly from Latin America and Spain. So I was not surprised because I was expecting that, but I love to see all those experiences that were so different, the variety of service learning experiences and projects that were taking place before the pandemic and then move on to a virtual setting, and also those experiences that are still taking place face-to-face. So I think that the biggest challenge ahead of us, for those of us who haven't gone back to school, those who would have to return to schools under a lot of uncertain conditions, I think that we are going to move between fear and responsibility. Fear, because I think that, especially if you're working with young children and adolescents, you feel that you have a high responsibility when you get them out of their home. That is to go from home to the school, or from the school to the community. So I think that just like we are making up or inventing protocols to have a safe return to school for young children and adolescents, we also need to have clearly designed protocols to know how students are going to reach out to the community. In that regard, I think that the educational system has a lot to learn from those that continued working in civil society or in social organizations and volunteering programs, continuing with their face-to-face service projects. They continue to feed those that were hungry despite the pandemic. And those that are considered essential workers also include many volunteer youth that are helping with tests or with vaccination or with food distribution. So I think that we will still feel that fear, that we need to act responsibly, but the biggest challenge will be to be able to deal with the urgencies that result from the pandemic and the lockdown, because we have a growing number of people who are jobless, hungry. We see increasing educational inequalities. Not all students have computers, not all have an internet connection. So I think that this will imply a big challenge for service learning, but also a big opportunity. If you allow me, Nieves, I think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that service learning is not only an educational methodology or philosophy. It is also a community development tool. That is, this is of interest not only for educators, it is of interest for the entire community. And in that regard, before the pandemic, and even more during the pandemic and after the pandemic, I think that one of the challenges will be to reinforce that link between the service learning movement and the social organizations movement that advocate for human rights and for more equality and more inclusivity. We shouldn't only focus on this from a pedagogical or a teaching standpoint. It is, of course, that is necessary, but that is not the only aspect. We have more people in the community that have an interest in helping in development. I think that service learning projects during the pandemic or during lockdown have continued, and now we need to do our best to pay attention to whatever help us shorten distances. Obviously, we will have to keep in mind distancing when we carry out our projects, but perhaps we can envision how to shorten that distance. And let me share with you some comments from my experience with Argentina. First, I think that we need to encourage communities to put forward their needs for service to schools. That is, the community should make that demand, should require that attention from students. Secondly, beneficiaries, service learning recipients, social organizations, collectives that are going to receive support need to be identified with their full name. That is one way of shortening distances. It is not ex-hospital that is asking for that support. It is Dr. Marisa Sierra together with, that is to personalize as much as possible that demand in order to give visibility to that need for support and service, because distances make things more abstract, less concrete. So let's try to bring it to more concrete terms. Thirdly, I think that we need to make a big effort, and in Spain this is a big effort, for young people to be aware of what they need to learn before they can engage in service. Otherwise, what happens is that the service function takes up all our energy, and we don't realize that we are learning along the way. So we need to place a focus there, because that is one way of fighting paternalism. That is something that is very important when you do service learning. Fourthly, I think that the service action has to be concrete and visible, and has to leave some physical footprint that has to help us shorten distances. If what we are doing, as many universities in Spain have done, is just to tell stories by the phone to young children in order to encourage them to read, well, we need to register that somehow. We need to make it tangible, visible. In the first place, I think that there must be some returns, some feedback. That is, young children have to realize that there is somebody else doing that for them, that somebody thanks them for that, and that the effort that they have engaged in has been fruitful and useful. I also think that the service learning project needs to have a clear beginning and a clear end. It cannot be indefinite. You need to have the end at sight. Otherwise, students or children lose control. They are no longer empowered. They need to have a clear start and end so that they can really take that leading role. And finally, I think that we need to work hard on the feeling of satisfaction for being part of a community that raises a problem and looks for a solution to that problem. Whatever helps to shorten distances will be positive in this new wave of service learning projects. Angie?
Just wanted to say that, to this point of, service learning is based on connectivity. It's on partnership, exchange of ideas, and being able to work with others on this initiative. So if we are not able to connect, then we can't do service learning. And as someone as an administrator at a university who's responsible for approving students to go out and have these experiences, make sure these experiences are safe for our students, it's a big challenge to strike that balance between the urgency we see in communities and the responsibility we have to make sure that the students have safe experiences, that we're not sending students out in harm's way. And our students are not always attentive to the protocols, the safety protocols, as much as we would like. And it was interesting in the Northern Hemisphere, we had this summer break where a lot of our students found themselves without the summer jobs they usually have or the summer opportunities, but they wanted to do something, they wanted to volunteer. And so what was interesting is we had several hundred students who stepped up and said, I want to do something, and trying to find opportunities for them. The university had made a decision to have everything be remote, no in-person instruction during the summer. And so I was very concerned about our students going to have opportunities. But what was really interesting is the creative ways that our community members and our students and our partners came up with being able to do things virtually and being able to do things remotely, and opportunities for tutoring and health screenings and all these things that came up, original ideas that came up because of the opportunity. So there are ways, but we do have to be very creative. But the reality is social distancing is going to be with us long after the pandemic is over. I don't think we're all going to be ready to jump into face-to-face work right away. And so to go back to Nieves' point about having these protocols in place for what service learning is going to look like when we can be closer, we can be in person, but we still have to maintain some social distancing where we still will be wearing our masks. What does that look like? And I think we need to be able to think ahead about what those protocols need to be, and not think that it's all going to go away after the pandemic is over. And this other idea of really allowing for these innovative new ways of thinking about how we're going to do business. I think this kind of forum in conferences is probably going to be a new way of we're going to conferencing. And I think that not because I love being on Zoom 8-10 hours a day, but because I find that some of the conferences we've had where we usually get 200 people suddenly have 500 people joining, because people feel that they don't have to travel across the globe to participate and get involved. What we're also seeing with our service learning is that students who normally would just be interacting with local community members are now working more regionally or more nationally or more globally because of the technology, and allows us to do this. We're becoming more acclimated to these kinds of forum. We may not always enjoy it, but it does provide a lot of opportunities that before we didn't even think about. And even just the translations and all the kinds of things that we're able to do now, I think is very powerful. So I think we're going to see new waves of service learning in activities that may not be person to person, but still connected with that exchange of ideas.
Yeah, I also want to echo to that too, because Nieves, you mentioned about we have fear, right? Because when we do service learning, and I think it's not only we have a fear, because I think for everyone here, you are listening also, you're also fear of the COVID. Yeah, honestly speaking, when when you stay at home and then everything locked down, and then you will also think about yourself. Yeah, and I think it is very normal that we have fear, but it's a matter of how we can overcome. Yeah, and as what Andy mentioned about service learning, let us connect. Yeah, and then because of the connection, and then we can actually exchange and also take the opportunity to care for each others. Yeah, and I believe other than fear that we have, and I think another difficulties is because what I heard, some other university, they just stop doing service learning. Yeah, because of the institutions have to think about the responsibility, safety issue. But honestly speaking, the community also not yet ready. Yeah, because they don't, some of the vulnerable group, they don't want the students to come and visit them also. Yeah, because we ourselves also need to think about whether we are also ready to meet with the vulnerable group. Yeah, I think it's actually two-way. It's not just one way that we think we want to serve, is somehow that we also need to see our community, whether they are ready to have people to work with them. I remember that I have a project because of the COVID-19, and then I talked to some of my colleagues and also caregiver, especially those who take care of person with dementia. And I'm not sure how many of you know about person with dementia. Actually, in the whole world, every 3 seconds, we have one person diagnosed with dementia. Yeah, and then because of the the partial lockdown, or some places they have fully locked down, and then the elderly, they cannot go out, and caregiver have to take good care of the person with dementia because they're worrying that they may be infected. Yeah, and then so they have a lot of worryings. Yeah, and then so when I talk to my friends, they are running their elderly center, and they have to stop their services. It's not because they don't want to serve. It's because they're afraid that the elderly, they go to the center, they maybe get infected. Yeah, and so they will, the government also advise them to stay at home. Yeah, and again, this kind of cases also let us know the reality. Yeah, then because of the reality, we have to think different way. Yeah, and this new normal is not only about the job, but also about how we serve. Yeah, and what Andy mentioned about your students thinking of different project, I think it's also the time for young people to think differently. Yeah, and in the past, maybe because of the curriculum, yeah, or maybe because the university, because we always talk about university and community partnership, right? But I think it's also the time now we have our young people to think about their relationship with the community. I'm not saying that in the past they don't think about it, but because of this, they have more time stay at home. Yeah, they have more time to connect with their family, and they know more about their family needs. Yeah, and I don't know whether you know that there are some TED Talk. Yeah, and then young people actually dance together with their grandparents at home. Yeah, and then you seldom see that before the pandemic. But because of this, they actually dancing together, they cooking together. This are all the opportunity that we can see, right? So I actually highly recommend for those who think that okay, safety is an issue, but we have to think about how we can make it more creative. Yeah, and talk to your young people and ask them. I'm sure that they can tell you how they can effectively or creatively to engage with our service recipient, because I understand that our young people, they have lots of ideas. Yeah, and so that's the opportunity that I see. Yeah, another thing that what I also see, because we all love travel, right? Yeah, and yeah, I used to go back to Hong Kong at least 6 times a year, but now I cannot. I have to stay in Singapore. Yeah, but you see my background. Yeah, as I have a coconut tree and also beach, right? I always use this background because I tell my friends I really want to go to the beach. I really want to go on a holidays. It's somehow, I want to tell people that, where am I? My friends are all said that, wow, your background is so nice. And then, yes, yeah, I have a self-actualization, stage already. Yeah, I'm on the beach. So somehow I think this is actually how we can, again, think creatively Yeah, and because of this, I connect my friends from other countries. Yeah, and I always tell my friends, yeah, from Zoom, one day I will go visit you. Yeah, and Andy, I want to tell you because of Zoom, I actually also connect some of the pioneers, service learning pioneer in the States, and I organize Zoom with them because I think of them one day, yeah, and then oh, how are they doing? Yeah, during the COVID, yeah, and then so I organize a Zoom, and I also hope that one day my students will organize Zoom with me and said that they want to care about me, yeah, and again for those who are young and listening these sessions, yeah, if you have a time, remember to talk to your teachers, organize a Zoom, just have a coffee and biscuits. Yeah, and this also a very good service learning. Yeah, another thing that I want to echo to Charco, I totally agree that there's also the opportunity, not only the university or educator to think about service learning. I wish we could have more corporate to think about their role. Yeah, I wish we could have more government unit to think about their role. Yeah, and I wish we could have more collaborations. And at the end, we can build an ecosystem together.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you so much to all of you. I have some words here that have come up. Empowerment, as Andy mentioned, care, the importance of caring ourselves and taking care of ourselves in order to take care of others. Carry out these transformational actions without losing sight of the care of the students, of ourselves, the teachers, the teams. I'm thinking of this thing about changing the way we do things and keep having this horizon as to giving a voice, communication, transforming our communities mainly. Although perhaps the means have to change because of the circumstances that we are facing. And some of you mentioned at the beginning this idea of peace and the construction of peace and raising awareness connected to this idea of fear generated by the pandemic and the current times. As Andy mentioned, this not only has to do with the pandemic, but also things related to violence and the difficulties that many democracies are going through. How service learning can be a tool to build trust so that we can continue working for those things to improve. And mainly, again, this idea of transformation, social transformation, the transformation of our communities, our own transformation, and how we all have the possibility of doing that, from the youngest to the oldest, the teachers, students, the communities, parents, the school authorities, etc. So these are some of the ideas. And I'd like to use the final minutes to see what your ideas are. What do you take from this meeting? What is there in your mind? I mean, what makes you keep thinking of all the things we've heard from one another? What makes you think? Perhaps new challenges you hadn't imagined, new opportunities. I think it's also interesting to think not only of challenges in this difficult context, but what opportunities also open up. When we think of organizing this seminar, it was a challenge, of course, at the beginning. It was a challenge for us to do it virtually. Even this is our 23rd conference. It's the first one that is virtual. But it's an opportunity also to reach more people. So I like these two sides of it. I'd like to hear your final comments along that line. I would like to share an anecdote with you that happens to me every time I have to organize a session on assessment in service learning. At the end of the session, I tell the teachers, educators that are in the audience, and I tell them, let's see, imagine that it is shown at research level. This perhaps Andy can answer this, but at research level, it is shown that through service learning, no subject is better learned, or we don't learn more about any subject because of service learning. We don't learn it better than without service learning. So under that assumption that is quite enigmatic, then I invite the participants in this seminar to think, in that case, under that assumption, would you keep developing service learning, or perhaps it wouldn't make any sense anymore? When I propose this question, there's silence in the audience. Nobody answers immediately. Everybody's thinking. There has to be a response to that, a secret answer, and everybody looks at one another. So the majority, most of the teachers, educators say, no, I would continue doing service learning, even if it doesn't improve learning. In this 15 years, only one teacher told me, no, if it is shown that learning is the same with or without service learning, I would not be involved in service learning. But the others told me they would. And then after that, we have the logical question. Okay, then if you would continue doing service learning, knowing this, why would you? Why are you going to be involved in the practice of service learning if it is proven that it doesn't improve the way we learn? So another silence, and people keep thinking. And at the end, we find the key to the answer. Why would you continue doing service learning? Because it is not only a strategy for learning better mathematics or language or any other subject at school. It is a tool, and I insist on this, for community development. It's not only a matter of education, it's a social issue. And educators are educators, but we're also citizens. We are also involved in a society that faces challenges. So when we reach that point, I think that educators breathe more relaxed and they say, well, we no longer have to compete or put service learning to compete with another modern methodology we can find, because I don't know how the interpreters are going to translate this, but the twist to it is to use it both as an educational and as a social tool, in the assumption that it is not the wonderful way of achieving better outcomes. We will still have the fact that it is a necessary social tool for the survival of our societies. That was the anecdote. Thank you, Charo. Andy?
Yes, thank you, Charo. Always great to hear those anecdotes. I would say, service learning started as an effort that didn't have a lot of background. It didn't have a lot of research. It didn't have a lot of support behind it. It was very much a grassroots effort. And it has been really amazing to see how over the years it has. Are you there?
Yes, they can hear you, Andy.
I thought I cut out. I apologize. It has been a grassroots effort. And what fascinates me is how it's become this global movement. When you think about all the pedagogies and practices that we see that are tied to education, they always have these very big research evidence behind it, all these major efforts and support and funding and all these things. And yet this movement has just grown and grown and grown and grown. And I think I remain really hopeful that service learning is something, to Charo's point, that it's not just about education is not just about work our students do, our young people do, but it is about societal transformation. And it taps into the best of our humanity, the best of all that we are as human beings who live in a society with each other. I think it brings out the best in us in times when one would think that those things are being crushed and pushed down every single day. And I think that it's a nourishment for the soul as we are living through these very, very difficult times. And I'm just amazed that when we have these sessions on service learning, pedagogy, or practice, or assessment, even evaluation, everyone doesn't like evaluation, but yet people come to these meetings and they attend because I think there's this sense that this is what's going to keep us going forward and sustaining us. And the people I've met in this field over the many years have just been the most dedicated, the most compassionate people I've worked with and have known. And I think it draws a certain personality or sets of personalities to this field of people who want to make a difference, who want to work together, to feel that we're all connected. And so I see a bright future for service learning. Even a pandemic like this can't squash the energy and the excitement for service learning. Even when we can't be together, we still want to do service learning. So I'm very hopeful. And I think that it's a pedagogy and practice and philosophy of service learning, that notion of solidarity that service learning is built on, that's going to get us through these difficult times. So I remain very hopeful for the future.
Carol?
Carol?
Yeah, I other than hopeful, I see opportunities. Yeah, and thank you again to invite me to share about my experience. And I think service learning is not just about the societal transformation, but somehow it's about life transformation. So we are all here, I'm sure that we all experience a certain kinds of service learning, experience. Not only we ourselves to design academic curriculum, but also ourselves to experience and also guide students to do reflections and work with the community partners, and then to let them understand more about from university perspective on why we do service learning. But at the same time, we also understand more about the importance of community development from the community perspective. And I think it's a process of co-create knowledge to also, co-build and also create a society. That's what we always talk about, the solidarity, right? Yeah, and I think the partnership that we have is more than just a pedagogy. Yeah, and I always remind myself, and while I'm working in the university, I always think about the service learning as a pedagogy, but from the community perspective, they may not think about it. Yeah, because they will have their own way to interpret, what do they mean by service learning? The reason that why they work with us is because, they want to make the society better. They want to create learning opportunity for our students. When I work with the community partners, I always talk to the partners and said that thank you to create opportunity for our students. I see the opportunity there, and I also very hopeful for our students. Nowadays, they can be more proactive, and more caring, and then more humble. That's actually what I want to see also, because service learning is another, way for us to understand not only about the society, but also understand ourselves and make us more humble to accept what's happening and see things from different perspectives. And I think again, to me, and I can also see many me, and also many my students, and now they are now working in the society, and they will still contribute. And so that's actually what I see. Service learning is not just in the school, but somehow, even though you graduate and you are still connected, Yeah, and that's the amazing part. I actually always think about service learning actually is a miracle. Yeah, I understand that some people, they may not like this term, but I always believe, yeah, once you believe in this, then you will continue to do it. I admit that, I hope even I'm 90 years old, I can still serve because this is a lifelong learning. So hopefully we can still work together, okay?
Uh, it,
That's wonderful, Carol. We know that there are new generations of leaders for the global service learning movement. That even those of us that are older, perhaps we'll finish this earlier than you, but we have those that will carry the torch ahead. So first of all, I would like to thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. It's been a luxury to have this conversation with you. I thank you, Andy, for having gotten up so early, Carol for having stayed up so late, Charo for having interrupted your vacation in the mountains to be in this Zoom meeting. And I repeat this social sense of service learning, as Charo mentioned, the hope that Andy mentioned that I share. I see the opportunities that Carol mentioned in these times. And I think that service learning is learning from practice. And in these difficult months we're going through, and those that we will face in the future, in the near future, we have a lot to learn from practice, from the practice of those students and teachers that are caring, that have had extraordinary service learning projects, or perhaps technically just volunteerism, but we have a lot to learn from the practices in the community in these months, those that were done virtually and those that were done face-to-face. And I have an image in my head that's very close physically to where I live. It's a University of Buenos Aires organized a call to all the students, an invitation to students to work as volunteers during these COVID times. And I was watching a video a few days ago where they showed that they were getting together at 8 p.m. on the stairs at the front of the School of Odontology of the University of Buenos Aires. They were keeping the social distancing. And there were students, teachers, the dean of the School of Dentistry that were organizing to distribute food among the homeless. And even amid the pandemic, they're still sleeping in the streets in downtown Buenos Aires. And that service capability and the care that as healthcare professionals they know that they have to respect when they go out to the streets to provide this service. And as like that, many other institutions, social, community institutions, and educational institutions, we have a lot to learn from them, from the experiences they have developed in these months, so that we can replicate them and multiply them and make this hope a real thing, the hope that service learning will overcome all the pandemics and all the difficulties and will keep us helping make this a better world. So thank you all so much, dear friends, and I hope we can see us face to face and give us a big hug in the near future. Luz? Thank you, all of you, for joining us. Thank you, Carol, for that hug. And I agree with what Nieves said at the end. Service learning helps us go through these situations, and it helps us achieve a world that will prevent the situations we are living through now, so that the reflection that is part of service learning and the thoughts that you shared, the ideas and the words that you shared, the personal history that you shared also, because this idea, what you said, that you started when you were very young, or you transformed your teaching career, or how you saw in that personal experience something that made your experience as educators better. So it's our own experiences in this, and being aware of the effect, the impact of what we do. So with this spirit of joy and of transformation, I thank you all so much for having joined us with all the difficulties we had with the different time zones and your vacation and all that. So we'll keep sharing this 23rd International Seminar. Thank you.